The following week, Alex sat in front of her laptop, her cursor blinking on the email draft addressed to Jordan. She'd promised to send him something, but now she was second-guessing every piece she'd ever written. Her blog was built on witty cynicism and sharp observations, a facade that felt more like armor than expression. But Jordan had already seen glimpses of the person behind the words, glimpses she hadn't meant to reveal. Finally, with a resigned sigh, she attached her most recent post, the one about vulnerability, and hit send. Subject: Don't say I didn't warn you. Here's one of my observations. No complaints allowed. 2 hours later, her phone buzzed. Jordan, wow. Just wow. Alex, that's either very good or very bad. Jordan, very good. You have a way of seeing things most people miss. It's honest. Unexpectedly hopeful, even. Alex, hopeful? That doesn't sound like me. Jordan, maybe it's more you than you think. Alex stared at his message, her chest tightening. She wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or exposed. The weekend came quickly, bringing another wedding, and another encounter with Jordan. This time, the venue was a historic library transformed into an enchanting event space, its high ceilings draped with ivy and warm, golden lights. Alex arrived early, hoping to avoid Jordan, but her plan failed. He was already there, directing his team as they arranged centerpieces on long wooden tables. You're early, Jordan said, spotting her. I like to get a lay of the land, Alex replied, slipping into her usual detached tone. Or you just couldn't stay away, he teased. Don't flatter yourself, Alex shot back, though her smile betrayed her. As the wedding began, Alex found herself seated near the front, a perfect vantage point for her notes. The bride and groom were an older couple, both in their 60s, radiating a love that felt steady and enduring. When the groom stumbled over his vows, laughing nervously, the bride reached out and squeezed his hand, her eyes sparkling. Alex's chest ached unexpectedly, the moment striking a chord she hadn't anticipated. She glanced at Jordan, who was standing near the back, his expression soft and content. It wasn't just the flowers or the setting, Jordan genuinely cared about the people. During the reception, Alex found herself cornered by Jordan at the dessert table. Okay, spill, he said, handing her a plate of cake. Spill what? Why you're really here. And don't give me that, just observing, line. Alex hesitated. She could usually deflect questions like this without a second thought, but Jordan's steady gaze made it hard to lie. Maybe I just like weddings, she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. Jordan raised an eyebrow. That's not the whole story. She sighed. Fine. Maybe I'm trying to figure out why people care so much about all this. About love, and commitment, and, forever. Jordan studied her for a moment before responding. You know, it's okay, not to have all the answers. Sometimes it's enough just to believe that the moments matter. Alex frowned, his words unsettling her in a way she couldn't explain. Later, as the night wound down, Alex found herself outside, leaning against the library's stone steps. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the nearby gardens. Jordan joined her, his jacket slung over one shoulder. Big night, he asked, breaking the silence. Something like that, Alex said. They stood quietly for a moment, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifting through the open doors. I used to think weddings were just pageantry, Alex admitted. A show people put on because they're supposed to. And now? Jordan prompted gently. Now? I don't know. Maybe there's more to it. Jordan smiled, his gaze warm. That's progress. Alex laughed softly, shaking her head. You're infuriating, you know that? I've been told, he said, grinning. That night, Alex didn't write a blog post. Instead, she sat on her couch, her laptop open but untouched. Her mind replayed the wedding, the way the groom's hands shook as he slipped the ring onto his bride's finger, and the quiet joy in Jordan's expression as he watched from the sidelines. For the first time in a long time, Alex felt the cracks in her armor widening, and she wasn't sure she wanted to patch them up. The weeks since that night at the library had blurred together in a way Alex hadn't anticipated. She found herself thinking about Jordan more than she was willing to admit, which wasn't exactly ideal. Her blog had always been her refuge, her place to keep the world at arm's length, but lately, her usual sharp commentary seemed harder to write. Instead, she found herself reflecting on the small moments, the things she once would have dismissed as sentimental or overly idealistic. Her phone buzzed one afternoon as she sat at her kitchen table, staring at a half-finished post about the perfectly imperfect nature of weddings, a subject she normally would have ridiculed. "Jordan, you coming to the wedding this weekend?" Alex hesitated before replying, her fingers hovering over the screen. She had avoided most of the weddings Jordan had invited her to, telling herself she wasn't ready to dive into the emotional quagmire of love stories. But this time, Alex, sure, why not? The venue was an upscale rooftop garden overlooking the city's skyline. Fairy lights hung from the railings, and the air was thick with the scent of blooming roses. It was the kind of wedding that Alex would have been quick to criticize in the past, the over-the-top decorations, the extravagant centerpieces, the lavishness of it all, but this time, she found herself appreciating the beauty. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Jordan spotted her as soon as she walked in. "You actually came," he said, his voice full of pleasant surprise. "I'm as surprised as you are," Alex replied, trying to hide the fact that she was glad to see him. Jordan smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'll take it." He offered her a glass of champagne. "You're just in time for the first toast." Alex accepted the glass, her gaze drifting over the crowd. The guests were already gathered in small clusters, chatting and laughing. She wasn't sure what it was, but something about the lightness of the evening felt different. Less like a spectacle, more like something genuine. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. The couple exchanged vows that were deeply personal, and Alex found herself watching them with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that made her chest tighten. When the bride started to cry, her hands shaking as she read her vows, Alex felt a lump form in her throat. Beside her, Jordan was smiling softly, as if the emotion in the room had become something he understood in a way that she hadn't yet figured out. After the ceremony, Jordan leaned over, his voice low. "It's the little things, right?" "What?" Alex asked, turning to him. "The way they look at each other. The small gestures. That's what it's all about." Alex shook her head, though she was struggling to suppress a smile. "I didn't think you were the type to get all sentimental." "I'm not," Jordan said, grinning. "But every once in a while, a couple does something that just clicks. Makes you believe in the possibility of it all." Alex met his gaze, her mind racing. "You really believe that?" Jordan nodded, his expression serious. "I do." "Why, you don't?" Alex bit her lip, turning away for a moment to collect her thoughts. She wasn't sure she was ready to admit it, even to herself. She didn't want to believe in the kind of love that Jordan seemed to have so much faith in, it felt too messy, too unpredictable. Before she could respond, a waiter passed by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, and Alex instinctively reached for one. "I'm not sure about that kind of love," she said, evading the conversation for now. "But I'm still figuring it out." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "You've got all the time in the world to figure it out." The reception was in full swing, and the music had shifted from slow ballads to something more upbeat. Guests were dancing under the stars, and Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie with the strangers around her, united in the celebration of something they all believed in. "Dance with me," Jordan said, appearing beside her out of nowhere, his hand extended. "Do you ever stop moving?" Alex asked, eyeing him suspiciously. "Only when I'm too busy working," he replied with a grin. "And I'm never too busy when you're around." Alex rolled her eyes but took his hand anyway. The moment their hands met, she felt a jolt of something, a kind of warmth she wasn't used to. They danced awkwardly at first, but soon the rhythm of the song settled between them, and Alex found herself laughing at their ridiculous moves. She was far from a graceful dancer, but with Jordan, it didn't matter. "See," he said, as they twirled in circles. "This is why you need to join the dance floor more often. You're missing out." "On what?" Alex asked, slightly breathless. "The feeling of being fully in the moment," Jordan said, his voice low. "Not worrying about the next thing, just enjoying right here, right now." Alex met his gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed to fall away. There was something about the way he looked at her, something that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone in the world as she thought. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. Jordan smiled, his eyes soft. "I always am." As the night wore on and the last song played, Alex felt an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. She hadn't expected to enjoy herself, let alone feel a connection to the event itself. But here she was, dancing with Jordan, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't worried about the next blog post or the next wedding to critique. Maybe the answer wasn't in the perfect picture she'd been chasing, but in the messiness of life, in the unpredictability, in the small moments that made everything feel worth it. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the weddings she needed to figure out, but herself. The morning after the wedding, Alex woke up with a feeling she couldn't quite place. The sky outside her window was overcast, casting a gray light over the room, but she couldn't shake the warmth in her chest. It wasn't just because of the night before, the laughter, the dancing, the small moments shared with Jordan, but because of something deeper, something she'd been avoiding for far too long. She opened her laptop and stared at the screen. Her latest blog post draft was still open, the cursor blinking impatiently. But this time, instead of filling the page with sharp, witty lines about how romantic gestures were overrated, she found herself writing something different. Maybe the real magic of weddings isn't in the perfect vows or the ideal setting. Maybe it's in the quiet moments, the way someone looks at you when they're not trying to impress, but just be with you. Maybe it's in the mess of it all, the imperfections that make things real. And maybe, just maybe, love doesn't need to be so hard to believe in. She hit save and leaned back, exhaling slowly. Was she really going to post this? Was she ready to admit that she was starting to feel differently about the whole concept of love and connection? Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. "Jordan, coffee?" She stared at the message for a moment, then typed back. "Alex, you're persistent. I'll meet you at the cafe in 30. 30 minutes later, Alex stepped into the small, cozy cafe where she and Jordan had agreed to meet. The place smelled of freshly ground coffee and baked pastries, the perfect setting for a lazy Sunday morning. Jordan was already there, his laptop open in front of him as he sipped from a cup. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "You look more relaxed than usual," he observed. "Don't jinx it," Alex replied, sliding into the chair across from him. Jordan laughed, then pushed a cup of coffee toward her. "I'll take my chances." Alex took a sip, grateful for the warmth that spread through her. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and for the first time in a long time, Alex felt no pressure to fill the space with words. "So, what's going on in that head of yours?" Jordan asked, raising an eyebrow. Alex sighed, setting her cup down. "I don't know. I've been thinking about what you said the other night. About being in the moment, not worrying about the next thing." Jordan nodded, his gaze soft. "And? I don't know if I've been present for a long time," Alex admitted. "I've always been focused on the next post, the next wedding to attend, the next thing to critique. It's like I've been waiting for the perfect story, the perfect moment, but I'm not living in any of them." Jordan studied her for a long moment before speaking. "That's a tough realization." "I guess it is," Alex said, fidgeting with her cup. "But the thing is, I think it's time to stop pretending I have everything figured out. I've been hiding behind this facade of cynicism for so long, I forgot what it feels like to just be. To just live." Jordan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You've always been good at reading people, Alex. But maybe it's time you start reading yourself. Alex smiled softly, meeting his gaze. I think I'm finally starting to. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and shared stories. Jordan told Alex about the latest wedding he'd worked on, and she found herself listening with genuine interest, no longer focused on finding faults or playing the role of the critic. They talked about their childhoods, their families, the things they'd learned over the years. By the time they left the cafe, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and orange. You know, Alex said as they walked out onto the street, I think I'm actually starting to get why you love this whole wedding thing. Jordan looked over at her, his eyes bright. Really?
Yeah,
Alex said, her voice quieter than usual. It's not just about the ceremony or the grand gestures. It's about the people who show up, ready to commit to something real, even if it's messy. Even if they don't know exactly what's going to happen next. There's something beautiful about that. Jordan smiled, the warmth in his expression making Alex's heart flutter unexpectedly. You've been thinking about this a lot, haven't you? Alex nodded.
Yeah,
more than I'd like to admit. Well, I'm glad you're thinking about it, Jordan said, his voice sincere. And I'm glad you're starting to see things a little differently. They stopped walking, the street lights casting a soft glow around them. For a moment, they just stood there, neither of them speaking. It was as if the world had slowed down, leaving just the two of them in this quiet moment. Then, without thinking, Alex reached for Jordan's hand. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it felt right. You're not as annoying as I thought, she said, her voice playful but with an undercurrent of something more. Jordan grinned, squeezing her hand gently. I'll take that as a compliment. They stood there for a while longer, the city bustling around them, but neither of them seemed to care about anything beyond this simple, quiet moment. For once, Alex didn't need to hide behind sarcasm or deflection. She didn't need to analyze everything to death. For the first time in a long time, she just was. And it felt like she was on the edge of something new. The weeks following that afternoon at the cafe felt like a whirlwind. Alex found herself more attuned to the moments around her, the way sunlight filtered through the trees during morning walks, the laughter that spilled from the open windows of her apartment, even the unspoken comfort in her interactions with Jordan. She hadn't realized how much she'd closed herself off from these little things until they began to matter more. It wasn't that she had everything figured out, far from it, but there was a shift. A quiet, subtle change. Her blog, once her shield and refuge, started to evolve. Her posts became less about biting commentary and more about the real, raw emotions she had spent years avoiding. It wasn't easy to be vulnerable, but somehow, sharing those pieces of herself felt more honest than anything she'd written before. She still had her doubts. Old habits die hard. But every time she felt herself slipping into cynicism, she thought of the way Jordan looked at her, as if he saw something worth believing in. It was a Friday evening when Alex received a message from Jordan. Jordan, there's a wedding tomorrow. Want to come? Her first instinct was to decline. Another wedding? Another round of pretending she didn't care about the love stories unfolding in front of her? But then she stopped. For the first time, she didn't want to hide. She didn't want to sit on the sidelines. Alex, sure. I'll be there. The venue was an old, converted barn, nestled in a field surrounded by wildflowers. The wooden beams were strung with twinkling lights, and the air smelled of fresh hay and earth. It wasn't the grandest wedding Alex had attended, but there was something incredibly intimate about it. The couple, both in their mid-30s, had been together for over a decade before finally tying the knot, and their love felt steady and real. Jordan was already there when Alex arrived, standing near the back, his camera ready. He caught her eye and smiled, and Alex felt an inexplicable warmth flood through her. It was more than just the way he looked at her, it was the way he made her feel seen, like there was no need to hide behind her usual mask. You made it, Jordan said, his voice low, a soft grin playing on his lips. I said I would, Alex replied, her smile tentative but genuine. You look good, he said, looking her over with a mixture of admiration and something else, something she wasn't sure she was ready to name. Thanks, she said, her heart skipping a beat. The ceremony was simple and sincere. There were no extravagant vows or grand gestures, just two people standing in front of their friends and family, promising to love each other for the rest of their lives. It was quiet, understated, but it felt like everything. Alex caught herself watching the couple, her mind drifting to the idea of commitment, of love that wasn't just a fleeting moment but a choice made day after day. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. She realized she was starting to understand what Jordan meant by the little things. After the ceremony, Alex found herself outside, standing near the flower garden. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the scene. Jordan joined her a few moments later, his camera now slung over his shoulder. Beautiful, isn't it? Jordan asked, his voice soft, as he watched the last rays of the sun dip below the horizon. It is, Alex said, her gaze lingering on the flowers, the couple laughing together in the distance. Sometimes, it's the quiet moments that make everything worth it, Jordan added. Alex turned to face him, meeting his gaze. You really believe that, don't you? Jordan shrugged, but there was a sincerity in his eyes that made Alex feel like she was seeing him for the first time.
Yeah,
I do. The small moments add up, you know? They're what make the big moments feel real. Alex nodded slowly, her heart beating a little faster. She had spent so much of her life avoiding this kind of connection, telling herself it wasn't worth the risk. But here, with Jordan, it felt different. He wasn't asking her to be someone she wasn't. He wasn't pushing her to be more than she could handle. He was just there. They walked around the grounds, talking about everything and nothing, their easy banter filling the quiet spaces between them. Alex felt lighter than she had in months, her guard slowly lowering as she began to appreciate the simplicity of being in the moment. As the evening progressed, they found a secluded spot near the edge of the field, away from the dancing and chatter of the guests. The soft hum of the music carried through the air, but it felt distant now. Jordan leaned against a tree, his arms crossed as he watched Alex. So, tell me something you haven't told anyone, he said, his tone light but serious. Alex raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. You're not a therapist, you know? I'm not, Jordan said, grinning. But I'm curious. About you. She hesitated, unsure of how to answer. She wasn't used to sharing the parts of herself that felt raw or unguarded. But there was something about Jordan's presence, the way he made her feel heard, that made her want to try. I've spent a lot of time convincing myself I don't need anyone, she said quietly, her gaze dropping to the ground. I've told myself that I'm better off alone. That relationships are just a source of pain, of complications, and I don't want any part of it. Jordan said nothing, just watched her, his expression understanding. But the truth is, Alex continued, her voice trembling slightly, I'm scared. Scared of needing someone, scared of getting hurt, scared of opening up to someone and having them leave. There it was. The truth she'd been hiding for so long. Jordan took a slow step forward, his presence steady and reassuring. You don't have to be afraid of that with me, Alex. Her heart skipped, and for the first time in a long while, she believed him. The night was winding down, and the last of the guests were beginning to leave. Alex found herself standing at the edge of the field once more, the cool evening air swirling around her. She felt different somehow, lighter, freer, more open. Jordan stood beside her, not saying anything, just letting the silence stretch between them. It was comfortable. Peaceful. I'm not saying I have it all figured out, Alex said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But maybe I'm ready to start figuring it out. With you. Jordan's eyes softened, and without a word, he reached for her hand, gently intertwining his fingers with hers. I'm in no rush, he said quietly. We'll take it one step at a time. And for the first time, Alex realized that wasn't a promise she needed to fear. It was exactly what she needed. The following week felt like an extension of the one before, soft, easy, and unexpectedly full of growth. The connection between Alex and Jordan, once a thread of curiosity and casual flirtation, was now something more, something real, even if it hadn't yet fully taken shape. The space between them no longer felt tense or uncertain. There was a warmth, a quiet understanding that passed between them without words, like they were both finally shedding the layers they'd worn for so long. The changes in Alex were subtle, but they were there. She'd started to leave her apartment more, taking walks in the park instead of staying cooped up in her office, staring at her laptop. She let herself enjoy the little things, like the crisp morning air and the sound of her sneakers tapping against the pavement. She also found herself reaching out to friends more, responding to messages, picking up the phone when someone called. She wasn't running away from life anymore, she was letting it come to her. And then there was Jordan. He had this way of making her feel safe, like she could say anything and everything without fear of judgment. Every time she saw him, there was an ease between them, as though their connection had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to surface. But still, there were things Alex hadn't told him, not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't sure she was ready to say them out loud. One Thursday evening, Alex found herself at one of the many small art galleries Jordan frequented. He had invited her to an opening night, a showcase for a local artist, and although she was hesitant at first, she couldn't deny the part of her that was eager to see him in his element. She walked through the gallery, taking in the vibrant paintings and abstract sculptures that filled the space. The energy was different from a wedding, no vows, no promises, but there was something undeniably intimate about it. The way the artist had poured their soul into each piece was apparent, and Alex couldn't help but think of the parallels to her own journey. Jordan found her near a series of large, bold paintings, their colors as chaotic and free as the thoughts in her head. "These are some of my favorites," he said, leaning beside her and following her gaze. The artist's work is all about transformation. About taking something that feels broken and making it beautiful. Alex nodded slowly, her eyes lingering on a painting of an empty street, its outline blurred, but the lights in the distance glowing with warmth. "It's like a reminder that even in the mess, there's beauty," she murmured, not sure where the words came from but feeling them deeply nonetheless. Jordan looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're not just talking about the painting, are you?" Alex turned to face him, startled by his perceptiveness. She had thought the words were just a passing observation, but something in the way he was looking at her made her realize he had seen through the surface. "I'm not," she admitted quietly. I think I've been avoiding the mess. The stuff that doesn't look perfect or polished. But I'm realizing it's those things, the broken parts, the unfinished stories, that make us whole." Jordan's gaze softened, his smile faint but warm. "It's a hard lesson to learn, but I think you're starting to get it." "I don't know if I'm ready to admit it," Alex said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so much time pretending I have it all figured out. I've built this wall around myself, and it's been easier to hide behind it than to face what's inside." Jordan stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "You don't have to hide, Alex." His voice was soft, steady, as though he'd been waiting for her to say this. "Not with me." Alex felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she could stop hiding, that she could let herself be seen in a way she never had before. But there was still a part of her, small, but insistent, that was afraid. Afraid of the vulnerability, afraid of the risk. "What if I'm too much?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if I fall apart, and you can't handle it?" Jordan didn't flinch. Instead, he gently cupped her face in his hands, tilting her chin so that she had no choice but to look at him. His eyes were serious now, his thumb brushing over her cheek in a tender, grounding motion. "Alex," he said quietly, "I'm not going anywhere. I don't need you to be perfect. I don't need you to have all the answers. I just need you to be here, with me, as you are. Whatever that looks like." Alex's heart raced in her chest. She had always been the one to pull away, to guard herself, to make sure she was never too vulnerable. But here, with Jordan, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be afraid. "Are you sure?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jordan smiled, his thumb still resting against her skin. "I'm sure." The night passed in a haze of conversation, laughter, and art. But as the evening wound down and the last of the guests began to filter out, Alex found herself standing in the middle of the gallery, Jordan's hand warm in hers. She wasn't sure what came next, whether this was the beginning of something deeper, or whether she was still standing on the edge, afraid to leap. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't rushing to figure it out. She was simply here. And for now, that was enough.